especially fresh vegetables. And the reason they can do it in Canada is they're grown in greenhouses, and energy is cheaper in Canada than it is in the United States. So, but before I begin, there are two things I want to do. And number one is I want to thank Sean for all the work that he's done. He's done a wonderful job with the Lunch with Books, but he is, I couldn't have done this course without him. He's done all the work, and if there's anything that goes wrong with the images, blame him, because everybody knows, don't let me touch it. Because if I touch it, it's going to break. And I have a wonderful record for that. But Sean has done a wonderful job, and I appreciate that very much. Despite the fact that he's a Steelers fan. Now, the other thing I wanted to do, we had talked a couple weeks ago about why Wheeling was the premier city. And we talked about its overwhelming industrial impact on the state. Well, you know, you keep learning things all the time. And the other day, when I was leaving, did you take this? Oops. Yeah. Okay. Well, I can't show you. But I was, Mrs. Thomas was showing me something up in her office, and I got out a book, and I said, gee, this is interesting. And it was, I knew the book simply because of the author's name. His name was I.V. Barton, and he was the Commissioner of Labor for West Virginia in the late 19th, early 20th century. And what the book was his findings for 1897-98. And among the other things was in there, two things that were of interest. One was the bituminous coal strike, which led to Wheeling being a big center for labor unrest, bringing in Eugene Victor Debs and Samuel Gompers, and every big leader came in here, and Debs spoke to maybe 3,000 to 4,000 people when he was here. But the other thing is it had a list of all the factory inspections in the state of West Virginia. So this afternoon, I wrote them down, and I think these are fascinating. Charleston had 9 factories. Clarksburg had 4. Fairmont had 8. Grafton had 8. Harpers Ferry had 3. Huntington had 10. Martinsburg had 10. Moundsville had 6. Parkersburg had 8. That's 66 factories in all of those cities. Wheeling had 77. Of the entire state, 55% of the factories inspected in 1897 and 98 were in one city. And I think that speaks volumes for the kinds of activities that went on here and the importance that went here. Now, as you can see, what we're going to do tonight, and it's going to be a little different, and Sean has put all this together. I gave him a list of some things, because I used to give my classes a list called Important Structures in Wheeling. And one of the things that I want to do is I want to show you what these structures are. Some of them aren't, I don't think any of them are going to be new to you, but show you why they're important. So we're going to start with the first one, the suspension bridge. Now, the suspension bridge is interesting for several reasons. One, it's one of 2 things in Wheeling that is a National Historic Landmark. Not a historic place. A historic place is okay, but a historic landmark is way above that. For example, some years ago, we tried to put Monument Place on the list of National Historic Landmarks, and the National Park Service said, not important enough. Okay? Now, those people in Wheeling, we just assumed that Monument Place has this great big history. In the overall history of the United States, no. Why does the suspension bridge make this list? The bottom photograph is a new one. The one above is probably from the early part of the 20th century, because the steel bridge hasn't been put in yet. It's the longest bridge in the world when it was put up. It's a bridge that went to the Supreme Court. If you're familiar with the story, the Supreme Court actually ruled against the suspension bridge. But it does help to have friends in Congress, and they were able to get this bridge, keep the bridge, identifying it as a mail route. Okay, but it's also important for technology, because what you see, and you can see it a little bit in this photograph. This is a suspension bridge. And what makes the suspension bridge are these little things right here. These are the suspenders. They're the cables in which the suspenders and, well, they will add things to it. Suspension bridges can be very difficult to build. Remember, the most famous disaster on a suspension bridge took place in the 1940s in Tacoma, Washington, in a wind that was no higher than some of the winds that we had 2 nights ago. They got that bridge galloping, and well, that's why it was called Galloping Gertie, and it went down. But it's the use of iron. It's the use of the iron in terms of iron wire, and using it in such a way that it adds the strength to it. And if you're familiar with this bridge, next time you go by it on this side, you know, the bridge actually is put into the ground as far over as here. And there's a huge concrete box down there with big hooks on it. I mean, it's that simple. It's not that suspension bridges are relatively new, it's just that this one was the longest at 1,000 feet. They're now, I think the longest suspension bridge is in Japan. And I think it's 5,000 feet, which is, but if you ever take a look at the Brooklyn Bridge, you'll see that the Brooklyn Bridge and this bridge look pretty close. And remember, the Brooklyn Bridge comes 30 years after this one. So this puts wheeling on the map. In fact, it still does. If you're into historic or industrial archaeology, you want to come to wheeling. Now, about the only thing that is original are the columns, or the piers on both sides. And if you're from Wheeling, you know that the bridge runs uphill. Okay, it's higher 20 feet on one side than it is on the other. You can't tell now because of the way the river is, but that's where the channel was. It was closer to this side so that the steamboats could go underneath it. But the technology, the significance in terms of transportation makes this thing very important. And it is the icon of Wheeling. It may be the most significant structure still in the city. Okay. And what we're looking at here, and it's a little difficult to tell, is this building right here. This is the Capitol Music Hall. This is where the Capitol Music Hall went originally. Now remember, if the Fort Henry project had gone in, this building would have stayed, this building would have stayed, and the building across the street would have stayed, and everything else was gone. Okay? I think the number of theaters in Wheeling would probably amaze you. Dr. Wolf, who was a colleague of mine at West Liberty, has a list